A soldier found an injured German shepherd trapped in chains in the jungle. What he did next shocked everyone. What you're about to listen will leave you in tears. This incredible true story of loyalty, love, and sacrifice will change how you see the bond between humans and dogs forever. Like, share, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The jungle was silent except for the soft patter of rain on leaves. Sergeant James Carter walked alone through the thick undergrowth, his boots sinking into the mud with each step. His eyes were hollow, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. The weight of his backpack felt light compared to the burden he carried in his heart. The guilt of losing his best friend Corporal Mike and their beloved K9 partner Axel in an ambush 3 years ago. James hadn't told anyone where he was going. His family thought he was on another mission, but the truth was darker. After years of nightmares and endless therapy sessions, he had made his decision. He would disappear into this jungle, leaving behind a world that held too many painful memories. The rain grew heavier, soaking through his jacket. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the shadows between the trees. James pulled out his water bottle, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely unscrew the cap. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint, he thought he had imagined it at first. A whimper, weak and filled with pain, carried on the wind. James froze. The sound came again, slightly louder this time. Something stirred in his chest, the first real emotion he had felt in months. His training kicked in, and he began moving carefully toward the source of the sound, pushing through dense vegetation. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. In a small clearing, chained to a massive tree, lay a German shepherd. The dog's ribs protruded sharply through its matted fur, and its eyes were dulled with exhaustion and fear. The chains wrapped around its body were new. This wasn't an accident. Someone had left this dog here to die. James approached slowly, his heart pounding. The dog's ears flattened against its head, and it bared its teeth weakly, expecting more abuse. But there was something about those eyes, something hauntingly familiar that made James's hands tremble as he knelt in the mud. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, keeping his voice soft and steady despite the storm of emotions in his chest. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The dog watched him warily, its chest heaving with each shallow breath. James noticed dark scars crisscrossing its body, signs of systematic abuse that made his jaw clench with anger. Who could do this to an animal? As he moved closer, his eyes caught something half buried in the mud near the dog's neck. His fingers brushed against metal, and his heart stopped. It was a dog tag, caked with dirt and rust. With trembling hands, he wiped it clean, and the world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. Axel, Military K9, Unit 214. James stumbled backward, his vision blurring. It wasn't possible. Axel had died in the ambush. He had seen the explosion, heard the yelp cut short by the deafening blast. Yet here he was, somehow alive, having endured years of torture and abuse. "Axel?" James's voice cracked. "Oh God, Axel, what did they do to you?" The dog's ears twitched at the name, but there was no recognition in those eyes, only fear and resignation. James reached out slowly, offering his hand palm up, but Axel recoiled, pressing himself against the tree trunk. Rain poured down James's face, mixing with tears he couldn't hold back. This wasn't just any dog. This was his partner, his friend, the one who had saved his life countless times in combat. And someone had kept him alive all these years, hurting him, breaking him down until he forgot who he was. James pulled off his backpack and took out his water bottle. He poured some into his cupped hand and held it near Axel's mouth. The dog hesitated, distrust warring with desperate thirst. Finally, his tongue darted out, lapping at the water with growing urgency. As James watched Axel drink, his earlier plans of disappearing forever shattered like glass. He had thought he had nothing left to live for, but fate had led him here for a reason. Someone had done this to Axel, someone connected to that terrible day 3 years ago, and they were still out there. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sound of breaking branches. James's head snapped up, scanning the darkness between the trees. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw movement, a shadow ducking behind a trunk. They weren't alone in this jungle. Axel's ears suddenly pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. He was looking past James, into the deepening darkness of the jungle. Despite his weakness, despite his fear, there was something else in his eyes now. A warning. James felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Someone was watching them, and somehow he knew this was just the beginning of a mystery that would change everything he thought he knew about that tragic day 3 years ago. Thunder crashed overhead as James worked quickly to free Axel from the chains. The metal links were secured with a heavy padlock, crusted with rust, but still sturdy. James pulled out his multi-tool and began working on the lock, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Each time the metal clinked, Axel flinched, but he didn't try to bite or pull away anymore. "Almost there, buddy," James murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Just hold on." As he worked, his mind raced through possibilities. Axel had been declared killed in action after the ambush. There had been a ceremony, a memorial plaque, even a folded flag presented to the K-9 unit. How had he ended up here, alive but broken? And more importantly, who had kept him all this time? The lock finally gave way with a soft click. James carefully unwound the chains, revealing more scars and wounds beneath. Some were old, silvery lines across Axel's skin. Others were fresher, barely healed. But it was the burn marks that made James's stomach turn. Perfect circles that could only have been made by cigarettes. "You're safe now," James whispered, though his throat felt tight with rage. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." A flash of lightning illuminated the clearing, and James caught a glimpse of something metallic glinting in the undergrowth about 20 feet away. His instincts screamed danger, but curiosity won out. He needed answers. "Stay here, Axel," he said softly, but to his surprise, the dog struggled to his feet. Despite obvious pain and exhaustion, Axel took a shaky step forward, then another, following James. The metallic object turned out to be a surveillance camera, mounted low in a tree and partially hidden by leaves. Its lens was cracked, but a small red light showed it was still operational. James's blood ran cold. Someone had been watching Axel's suffering, monitoring him like some sick experiment. He reached up to grab the camera, but Axel suddenly barked, a hoarse, urgent sound. James spun around just as a dark figure darted between the trees. Without thinking, he started to give chase, but Axel's teeth caught his sleeve, pulling him back with surprising strength. The dog's eyes were no longer vacant. There was intelligence there, and fear, not for himself, but for James. A warning. "You know them, don't you?" James asked quietly. "You know who did this?" Axel released his sleeve and limped a few steps toward a dense patch of vegetation. He pawed at the ground, whining softly. James followed, pushing aside the wet leaves to reveal a small hollow beneath a fallen log. Inside was a weathered backpack, military issue, partially decomposed from exposure. With trembling hands, James pulled it out. The name tape was still legible. CPL Michael Rodriguez. "Mike's pack," James breathed. But how? Inside, he found a waterproof tactical notebook. Most pages were blank, but in the middle was a hastily scrawled message. "Jay, if you find this, trust no one. The ambush wasn't random. They wanted the intel. Axel knows where. Keep him safe. M." James sat back on his heels, mind reeling. The official report had stated that their unit had stumbled into an enemy position by accident, but Mike's message suggested something far darker, a planned attack, a targeted strike. But what intel? And who were they? A branch snapped nearby, and both James and Axel tensed. The rain had softened to a drizzle, making it easier to hear movement in the jungle. Someone was circling their position. James quickly stuffed the notebook into his pocket and shouldered his pack. They needed to move. But when he looked at Axel, his heart sank. The dog was trembling with exhaustion, barely able to stand. They wouldn't get far with him in this condition. Making a quick decision, James shrugged off his jacket and spread it on the ground. "Come here, buddy," he whispered, patting the fabric. To his surprise, Axel understood immediately, carefully lying down on the jacket. James gathered the corners, creating a makeshift sling he could carry. "I know it's not comfortable," he said as he lifted Axel, grunting with the effort. "But we need to get out of here." As if understanding the urgency, Axel remained perfectly still in the sling, his eyes scanning the darkness around them. James began moving through the jungle as quietly as he could, grateful for his military training. Every few steps he paused to listen, trying to detect pursuit. They had gone about half a mile when Axel suddenly grew tense in the sling. His ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. James froze, straining his senses. At first, he heard nothing but the drip of water from leaves. Then, a click. The unmistakable sound of a safety being switched off. James slowly turned around. In the growing darkness, he could make out 3 figures emerging from the shadows, their weapons trained on him. They wore civilian clothes, but moved with military precision. "Sergeant Carter," one of them called out softly. "Put the dog down and step away. This doesn't have to get messy." James's mind raced. They knew his name. They had been waiting for him. None of this was a coincidence. "Who are you?" he demanded, though he suspected they wouldn't answer. "The dog, Sergeant. Now." Axel's growl grew louder, and James felt him struggling to get free of the sling. Despite his weakness, despite years of abuse, the old warrior spirit was awakening in him. He wanted to fight. "Last chance," the man said. "Don't throw your life away for a dying dog." James looked down at Axel, at the scars that marked years of torture, at the eyes that now blazed with recognition and purpose. In that moment, he made his choice. "He's not just a dog," James said quietly. "He's my partner." And then several things happened at once. Axel burst from the sling with unexpected strength. James dove for cover behind a massive tree trunk, and the jungle erupted in gunfire. Bullets splintered bark inches from James's head as he pressed himself against the tree. Through the chaos, he heard Axel snarling, followed by a man's scream of pain. Despite his weakness, the German Shepherd had apparently lost none of his combat training. "Take the dog alive!" someone shouted. "We need him!" Those words sent a chill down James's spine. This wasn't about silencing witnesses or tying up loose ends. They wanted Axel for something specific. Mike's message flashed through his mind. Axel knows where. A bullet grazed his shoulder, burning like a hot wire. James bit back a cry of pain and assessed his situation. He had no weapon. He hadn't planned on needing one for what he'd intended to be his final journey. But he did have his military training and intimate knowledge of jungle warfare. "Axel, come!" he called out, using the old command tone that had served them in combat. To his amazement, Axel immediately disengaged from his attack and limped rapidly toward James's position, staying low. The bond was still there, buried beneath years of abuse and trauma. Axel remembered his training, remembered what they had been together. James reached into his pack and pulled out his emergency flare. The rain had stopped, and the jungle floor was covered in dry leaves. It was risky, but they were out of options. "Stay close, buddy," he whispered to Axel, who pressed against his leg, breathing heavily but alert. Then James struck the flare and threw it into a dense patch of vegetation. The effect was immediate. Dry leaves and branches caught fire, creating a wall of flames that spread quickly in the darkness. Shouts of alarm rose from their attackers as the fire forced them to retreat or risk being trapped. "Now!" James scooped up Axel, ignoring the burning pain in his shoulder, and ran in the opposite direction. The dog was heavy, but adrenaline gave him strength. Behind them, the fire created confusion and cover for their escape. They ran for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. James's lungs burned, and his wounded shoulder screamed in protest, but he didn't stop until they reached a small stream. He set Axel down gently and collapsed beside him, chest heaving. "Good boy," he gasped, reaching out to scratch behind Axel's ears. This time, the dog didn't flinch away. Instead, he pressed his head into James's hand, his tail wagging weakly. The simple gesture of trust brought tears to James's eyes. After everything Axel had endured, the loyal heart of his old friend was still there, still willing to trust and fight beside him. But they weren't safe yet. James tore a strip from his shirt and quickly bandaged his shoulder. The wound wasn't deep, but it needed attention. More pressing was Axel's condition. The burst of activity had taken its toll on his weakened body. The dog lay panting, his legs trembling with exhaustion. "We need to find help," James muttered, more to himself than to Axel. But where? The nearest town was miles away, and those men would be looking for them. They needed somewhere closer, somewhere safe to rest and regroup. That's when James remembered. The old ranger station. It had been abandoned years ago when the Park Service built a new facility, but the building should still be standing. "Think you can make it a little further, buddy?" he asked Axel, who struggled to his feet in response. determination in his eyes. They moved more slowly now, James supporting some of Axel's weight as they picked their way through the darkness. The moon had risen, providing just enough light to navigate. Every sound made them freeze. A night bird's call, a rustling in the canopy above, the snap of a twig. After about an hour, the ranger station came into view. It was a small wooden structure, weathered but intact. James approached cautiously, Axel limping beside him. The dog's ears were forward, alert for danger, but he showed no signs of anxiety. The door was locked, but the wood around the handle was rotted. One solid kick, and they were inside. The interior smelled of dust and abandonment. Moonlight filtering through dirty windows revealed a simple room with a desk, some chairs, and a basic first aid cabinet mounted on the wall. James helped Axel settle onto an old blanket he found in a corner, then checked the first aid supplies. Most were expired, but he found some still sealed bandages and antibiotic ointment. He cleaned and dressed his shoulder wound, then turned his attention to Axel's injuries. The dog lay still as James carefully cleaned the worst of his wounds, only whimpering slightly when antiseptic was applied to the deeper cuts. As he worked, James talked softly, telling Axel about the 3 years he thought him dead, about the guilt and grief that had nearly destroyed him. "I should have looked for you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have known you were too tough to die in that blast." Mike knew, didn't he? That's why he left that message. At the mention of Mike's name, Axel's head lifted, his eyes fixed on James with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. There was intelligence in that gaze, and something more, a desperate need to communicate. "What is it, boy? What were you guarding out there? What do you know?" Axel struggled to his feet and limped to the desk. He pawed at the bottom drawer, whining softly. James opened it, finding only dust and old papers. But Axel's excitement grew. He nosed aside the papers, revealing something scratched into the wood of the drawer bottom. Numbers. "Coordinates," James breathed, recognizing the format. But to where? Before he could copy them down, Axel suddenly went rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest as his eyes fixed on the window. James dropped to the floor, pulling Axel with him into the shadows. Flashlight beams swept across the windows. They'd been found. "Check inside," a voice commanded. "They have to be here somewhere." James looked at Axel, saw the same determination in his partner's eyes that he felt in his own heart. Whatever secret Axel had been protecting all these years, whatever truth Mike had died trying to expose, it was worth fighting for, worth dying for, and they would face it together. James's mind raced as footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. The ranger station had only 2 exits, the front door and a small window in the back. The window was their best chance, but Axel was in no condition for another chase through the jungle. The door handle rattled. James pulled Mike's notebook from his pocket and quickly copied down the coordinates Axel had revealed. Whatever they led to, he couldn't let it fall into their pursuers' hands. "On 3, a voice commanded outside. 1, 2... James wrapped his arms around Axel, lifting him as gently as possible. The dog remained perfectly still, understanding the need for silence. They had just reached the back window when the front door burst open with a crash. Flashlight beams swept the room as 3 men entered, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. James held his breath, pressing himself and Axel into the deepest shadows behind an old filing cabinet. "Clear the corners," one man ordered. "They're here somewhere. The dog's bleeding. There's a trail." James looked down and his heart sank. Small droplets of blood from Axel's wounds marked their path across the floor. The trail led directly to their hiding spot. Axel tensed in his arms, a low growl building in his chest. James stroked his head, silently willing him to stay quiet. But he knew it was only a matter of seconds before they were discovered. That's when something unexpected happened. A series of loud crashes echoed from the jungle, followed by shouts and gunfire. Their pursuers spun toward the sound, momentarily distracted. "What the hell was that?" one of them demanded. "Team 2's under attack," a voice crackled through their radios. "Multiple hostiles, professional operators, we need backup." The men exchanged glances, clearly torn between continuing their search and responding to the call for help. Another burst of gunfire decided it for them. "Check the perimeter and fall back to the rally point," the leader ordered. "Move!" They rushed out, leaving the door open behind them. For several long moments, James didn't move, hardly daring to breathe. Who was attacking their pursuers? Another player in this deadly game? When the sound of footsteps had faded, James carefully set Axel down and crept to the door. The jungle was quiet again, but in the distance he could see flashes of light and hear the faint pop of gunfire. "This is our chance, buddy," he whispered to Axel, "but we need to move fast." Instead of heading directly away from the fighting, James chose to circle around it. The sounds of combat would mask their movement, and their pursuers would be focused on the new threat. They made slow progress through the darkness. Axel was getting weaker, his breathing labored. The burst of activity earlier had depleted his already limited strength. James's own shoulder throbbed, and he could feel blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. After about 20 minutes, they came across fresh tire tracks in the mud. A vehicle had passed through recently. Following the tracks led them to a narrow dirt road, barely visible in the moonlight. "We need to find transport," James muttered. "We'll never make it on foot." As if in answer to his thoughts, a faint engine sound reached his ears. Headlights appeared in the distance, coming their way. James quickly pulled Axel into the undergrowth, watching as a battered pickup truck approached. The truck was moving slowly, its driver clearly struggling with the muddy conditions. As it drew closer, James made out a Parks Department logo on the door. A ranger, probably checking on reports of gunfire in the area. It was a risk, but they were out of options. James stepped onto the road, waving his arms. The truck slowed to a stop, and a young ranger peered out through the window, looking nervous. "Thank God," James called out, trying to sound relieved rather than desperate. "My dog's hurt. We need help." The ranger's eyes widened as he took in James's bloody shoulder and Axel's condition. "What happened?" "I heard shooting." "Poachers?" James lied smoothly. "We surprised them while hiking. They opened fire. Please, my dog needs a vet." The ranger reached for his radio, but James quickly added, "The poachers took my phone. Could you just give us a ride to town? The authorities can take our statement there." After a moment's hesitation, the ranger nodded. "Hop in the back. There's a blanket back there for your dog." James helped Axel into the truck bed, then climbed in himself. As they drove away, he watched the jungle recede behind them, still echoing with distant gunfire. Who were these new players? Friends or enemies? The coordinates from the ranger station burned in his pocket. He pulled out the notebook and studied them again. They pointed to a location deep in the mountains, at least a day's journey from here. What would they find there? What secret had been worth 3 years of Axel's torture? The dog lay with his head in James's lap, finally allowing himself to rest. Looking down at his old friend, James felt a fierce surge of protective love. Whatever they were caught up in, whatever truth Mike had died trying to expose, he would see it through. For Axel, for Mike, for justice. The truck hit a pothole, jolting them. Axel whimpered softly, and James noticed fresh blood on the blanket. His partner needed medical attention soon, but regular vets would ask too many questions, might even report them to authorities who could be compromised. Then he remembered someone, Dr. Sarah Chen, a vet who had treated military dogs during his deployment. She had left the service to open a private practice in a small town not far from here. If anyone would help them without asking too many questions, it would be her. James leaned forward and tapped on the truck's back window. The ranger slid it open. "There's a town called Millbrook about 30 miles east," James said. "Know it?" The ranger nodded. "Sure, pass through there sometimes. That where you're headed?" "Yeah, I have a friend there who can help." As the ranger turned onto a larger road, James felt Axel relax slightly. Perhaps the dog remembered Dr. Chen, too. Or maybe he simply sensed they were heading toward help rather than running from danger. But James couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a brief respite. Somewhere behind them, 2 groups of professional operators were engaged in a firefight. Someone had spent 3 years torturing Axel for information. And somewhere in the mountains, a set of coordinates held answers that powerful people would kill to protect. Their journey was far from over. The ride to Millbrook took nearly 2 hours, each bump in the road drawing a quiet whimper from Axel. James kept one hand on his partner's head, offering what comfort he could while watching the darkness for signs of pursuit. The ranger, who'd introduced himself as Kevin, seemed content with silence, occasionally glancing at them in his rearview mirror. Dawn was breaking when they reached the outskirts of Millbrook, the sky turning a pale gray above the sleepy town. Kevin pulled into a gas station, the fluorescent lights harsh after hours of darkness. "This is as far as I go," he said, turning around in his seat. "You sure you don't want me to call someone?" James shook his head, helping Axel down from the truck bed. "Thanks for the ride. We'll be fine from here." As Kevin's truck disappeared into the morning mist, James took stock of their situation. His shoulder had stopped bleeding, but throbbed with every movement. Axel was barely standing, his legs trembling with exhaustion. They needed to find Dr. Chen quickly. James remembered her clinic being on the east side of town, near the old railroad tracks. Supporting some of Axel's weight, they made their way through empty streets, avoiding the few early morning workers starting their days. The clinic was a small building with peeling blue paint and a simple sign, Chen Veterinary Services. The lights were off, but a car was parked around back, an early arrival. James led Axel to the rear entrance and knocked softly. After a moment, footsteps approached. The door opened a crack and a familiar face peered out. Dr. Sarah Chen, looking exactly as James remembered her. Her dark hair was streaked with more gray now, but her eyes were still sharp and observant behind her glasses. Those eyes widened as she took in the sight before her. "Sergeant Carter? But you—" Her gaze fell to Axel, and she gasped. "Oh my God, is that—" "We need help, Sarah," James said quietly. "And we need it off the books." She hesitated only a second before opening the door wider. "Get in, quickly." The back room of the clinic was warm and smelled of antiseptic. Dr. Chen helped James lift Axel onto an examination table, her experienced hands already checking vital signs. "This dog was declared KIA 3 years ago," she said as she worked. "I signed the death certificate myself." "It's a long story," James replied, "and not a safe one to know." She met his eyes. "Does this have anything to do with the rumors?" "What rumors?" Dr. Chen's hands never stopped moving as she spoke, cleaning Axel's wounds with practiced efficiency. "After the ambush, there were whispers in the military veterinary community. Some of our best K9s were being lost in suspicious circumstances. Training accidents, ambushes, disappearances. Always the most highly trained dogs, ones with special operations experience." James felt a chill run down his spine. "How many?" "At least 7 that I know of, all declared killed in action, all bodies never recovered." She gestured to Axel's scars. "These aren't random abuse marks, they're systematic. Someone was trying to condition him, to break him down and rebuild him. But why? What could they want from a dog?" Dr. Chen's expression was grim. "You'd be amazed what these dogs know, Sergeant. They see everything, remember everything, routes, faces, locations, and they can't be interrogated in traditional ways, can't be broken by normal psychological pressure, so someone developed other methods." As if understanding they were talking about him, Axel whined softly. James stroked his head, noticing how the dog leaned into his touch now, trusting him again, despite years of abuse. "He recognized coordinates," James said quietly. "In the ranger station. He showed them to me." Dr. Chen paused in her work. "That doesn't surprise me. These dogs are trained to remember specific locations, to lead their handlers back to places of interest. Whatever Axel saw 3 years ago, whatever he knows—" She trailed off as a sound caught her attention. "Did you hear that?" James tensed, listening. Footsteps in the front of the clinic, the scrape of a lock being picked. "Is there another way out?" he whispered. Dr. Chen nodded toward a small window. "But Axel's in no condition to run. He needs at least an hour for the medications to start working." The footsteps were getting closer. James made a quick decision. "Hide him. I'll lead them away." "James, no." "Sarah, please. Whatever's going on, it's bigger than us. Axel's the key to everything. Promise me you'll protect him." After a moment, she nodded. "There's a concealed storage space under the operating room floor. We used to hide rescued fighting dogs there during raids." Together, they quickly moved Axel to the hidden space. The dog tried to resist, not wanting to leave James, but was too weak to fight. "I'll come back for you," James promised, looking into his partner's eyes. "Just like you waited for me. Trust me, buddy." The hidden door closed just as the examining room door began to open. James slipped out the window, deliberately leaving a blood smear on the sill. As he ran down the alley, he heard shouts behind him. They took the bait. His shoulder screamed in protest as he vaulted a fence, but he pushed through the pain. He had to put as much distance between them and the clinic as possible, had to make them believe Axel was with him. A bullet sparked off the wall beside his head. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. James ducked into a narrow space between buildings, his mind racing. He couldn't keep running forever. He needed a plan. Then he saw it. The railroad tracks, and beyond them, the old grain mill. Its abandoned bulk rose against the morning sky like a fortress. If he could reach it, he might have a chance to turn the tables on his pursuers. More bullets kicked up dust at his feet as he sprinted across the open ground toward the mill. His lungs were burning, his wounded shoulder sending waves of fire down his arm. But he kept running, driven by a single thought. Every step took their hunters further from Axel. He just hoped his partner would understand why he had to leave him behind, and that whatever secret was hidden in those coordinates was worth all this pain. The interior of the grain mill was a maze of rusted machinery and shadows. James's boots kicked up clouds of ancient dust as he ran, leaving obvious tracks. But that was part of the plan. He needed his pursuers to follow him deep into the building. Years of military training kicked in as he moved. Every shadow could be a hiding place. Every rusted piece of equipment a potential weapon. He could hear them entering the building below, their footsteps echoing on metal stairs. "Split up," a voice commanded. "Watch the exits. He's trapped in here." James allowed himself a grim smile. That's what they thought. He hadn't spent 3 years training in urban warfare for nothing. This wasn't his trap. It was theirs. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, Dr. Chen worked quickly to treat Axel's wounds. The hidden space under the floor was cramped but secure, lined with old blankets that helped muffle any sounds. She could feel the dog's eyes on her as she cleaned his injuries, intelligent and worried. "He'll come back," she whispered, more to herself than to Axel. "He always completed his missions, no matter what. This time won't be different." Back in the mill, James had reached the upper level. Ancient grain hoppers hung from the ceiling like giant metal cocoons, their sides stained with rust. The morning light filtered through broken windows, creating patches of shadow and light. He heard footsteps on the catwalk below him. 2 men moving carefully, weapons ready. They were professionals, checking corners, maintaining spacing. But they had one disadvantage. They didn't know the truth about that day 3 years ago. Not like he was starting to figure it out. The pieces were falling into place now. The suspicious deaths of other military dogs. The coordinated ambush. The years spent torturing Axel for information. This wasn't about military secrets or strategic locations. This was about something specific that Axel had seen. Something so important that powerful people had spent years trying to extract it from his loyal mind. A floorboard creaked behind him. James spun, but he was a fraction too slow. A fist caught him in the wounded shoulder, sending explosions of pain through his body. He staggered back, barely blocking a second strike. His attacker was dressed in black tactical gear, face hidden behind a mask. They fought in silence, each blow calculated and precise. This wasn't a street brawl. This was military combat training. James managed to land a solid hit to his attacker's solar plexus, buying himself a moment to reach for a rusted pipe lying nearby. But as he grabbed it, something about the man's fighting style clicked in his mind. The way he moved, the combination of strikes. "Morrison?" James gasped. "Jack Morrison?" The man hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm James's suspicion. Morrison had been their hand-to-hand combat instructor, one of the best in the special operations community. He had also been there the day of the ambush. "Why?" James demanded, keeping the pipe ready. "Why are you involved in this?" Morrison's response was another attack, but James was ready this time. He blocked the strikes, turning his opponent's momentum against him. They crashed into an old control panel, sending sparks flying from ancient electrical connections. Was it all a lie? James pressed. The training? The brotherhood? Did you help set up the ambush? "You don't understand," Morrison growled, his voice muffled by the mask. "What that dog saw, it could bring down entire operations. People would die." "People already died," James shot back. "Mike died. And you tortured Axel for 3 years. Their fight had attracted attention. James could hear the others running up the stairs. He needed to end this now. "Whatever Axel saw," James said, "whatever's at those coordinates, Mike thought people needed to know. That's why he left the message. That's why you couldn't break Axel. Some things are worth dying for." Morrison lunged forward, but his attack was rushed, emotional. James sidestepped, swinging the pipe with all his strength. It connected with Morrison's temple, dropping him to the floor. The others were almost there. James ran to one of the broken windows, looking down at the railroad tracks below. A crazy idea formed in his mind. Back at the clinic, Axel suddenly lifted his head, ears perking up. Dr. Chen paused in her work, listening. In the distance, she could hear the whistle of the morning freight train approaching the crossing. James took a deep breath, looking at the approaching train. The timing would have to be perfect. He could hear his pursuers reaching the upper level, shouting as they found Morrison unconscious. "Follow the coordinates, Axel," he whispered. Then he jumped. For a moment, he was falling through empty air, the ground rushing up to meet him. Then he hit the roof of a passing freight car, rolling with the impact. Pain exploded through his wounded shoulder, but he held on as the train picked up speed, carrying him away from the mill, from Morrison, from the truth he was starting to uncover. His last glimpse of Millbrook was the old grain mill silhouetted against the rising sun, his pursuers watching helplessly from the broken window. They wouldn't follow. The train was moving too fast now, heading west into the mountains. But James wasn't running away. The coordinates Axel had shown him were burned into his memory. They pointed to a location high in those same mountains, where the freight line passed through an old mining district. As the train clattered through the morning, James checked his shoulder. The wound had reopened during the fight, but it wasn't serious. He had survived worse. And somewhere back in Millbrook, Axel was safe with Dr. Chen, finally getting the medical care he desperately needed. James closed his eyes, feeling the rhythm of the train beneath him. Morrison's words echoed in his mind. What that dog saw, it could bring down entire operations. What had Axel witnessed that day? What secret was worth betraying everything they had fought for? The answer was waiting in the mountains. And this time, James wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth. The freight train rumbled through valleys and tunnels, each mile taking James closer to the coordinates that held the key to everything. The morning sun had risen fully now, warming the metal roof of the freight car. His shoulder had stopped bleeding again, but the pain remained a constant reminder of how close he'd come to being caught. Meanwhile, in Dr. Chen's clinic, Axel was showing signs of improvement. The antibiotics were working, and some strength had returned to his legs, but the dog remained restless, his eyes constantly moving to the window, watching for James's return. "He's like that, you know," Dr. Chen said softly as she changed Axel's bandages. "Never could stay away when one of his team was in danger. I remember in Afghanistan when a young handler was pinned down by enemy fire. James ran through a minefield to reach him. Everyone thought he was crazy, but he said he'd never leave a partner behind." Axel's tail thumped weakly at the story, as if he remembered too. Dr. Chen smiled, but her eyes were worried. She had seen the news reports starting to come in, a fire in the jungle, gunshots at the old grain mill. Whatever James was involved in, it was escalating. On the train, James was studying Mike's notebook again. Beyond the coordinates, there were other marks he hadn't noticed before, small dots and dashes that looked random, but might be some kind of code. Mike had always been clever about hiding information in plain sight. The train began to slow as it approached a switching station. James knew he couldn't stay on board much longer. Morrison's team would have radioed ahead, and there might be people watching the tracks. He needed to disappear into the landscape. As the train crawled around a bend, James spotted what he needed, a steep wooded slope leading up into the mountains. Timing his move carefully, he rolled off the freight car, hitting the ground running. The impact sent fresh waves of pain through his shoulder, but he pushed through it, scrambling up the slope before anyone could spot him. Back in Millbrook, Dr. Chen was facing her own crisis. A black SUV had parked across the street from her clinic. 2 men in suits watching the building. They hadn't come in yet, but it was only a matter of time. "Time to move, boy," she whispered to Axel. There was a back entrance to the hidden space that led to underground drainage tunnels, a remnant from when the building had been part of the town's old meatpacking district. She had never thought she'd need to use it. Axel seemed to understand the urgency. Despite his injuries, he followed her quietly through the narrow tunnel, staying close to her legs. The darkness was complete, but the dog's presence was oddly comforting. If she could sense his alertness, his military training still sharp despite years of abuse. They emerged 2 blocks away, in an abandoned lot behind the old hardware store. Dr. Chen had a plan. Her sister owned a cabin in the mountains, isolated enough to be safe, but close enough to the coordinates James had mentioned. If she could get Axel there, they might have a chance to reunite him with James. High in the mountains, James was making his way through dense forest, using the sun to navigate. The coordinates pointed to a location about 10 miles ahead, in an area marked on old maps as abandoned mining territory. But if Morrison's reaction was any indication, something much more active was hidden up there. His military training helped him spot the signs: broken branches artificially arranged to look natural, camera mounts disguised as bird nests, subtle marks on trees that would guide patrols along specific routes. This wasn't abandoned territory. This was a carefully monitored perimeter. A distant helicopter sound made him freeze. Through gaps in the canopy, he spotted a black shape moving across the sky. Not military, but definitely professional. They were searching for him. James found cover under a fallen tree, using the time to think. Morrison had said that what Axel saw could bring down entire operations. The systematic disappearance of military dogs, the elaborate cover-up, the years spent trying to break Axel. It all pointed to something massive, something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. He thought back to the day of the ambush. They had been on a routine patrol when Mike had spotted something through his binoculars. He had seemed shocked, immediately calling for Axel to confirm the location. Minutes later, the attack began. What had they seen? What was hidden in these mountains that was worth killing for? The helicopter sound faded, and James began moving again, more carefully now. He was getting close. He could feel it. But the real question was whether he could get to the truth before Morrison's people found him. In the town below, Dr. Chen was loading Axel into her old Jeep, hidden under blankets in the back seat. She had packed medical supplies, water, and food, enough to keep them going for several days. As she pulled away from the clinic, she saw the men in suits finally approaching the building. They were too late. Axel whined softly from the back, and she reached back to scratch his ears. "I know, boy. We'll find him. James has never let you down before, has he?" The dog's tail thumped against the blankets in response. Despite everything he had endured, his faith in his partner remained unshaken. Dr. Chen found herself wondering if she would ever find that kind of loyalty in her life. The mountain roads were treacherous, switching back and forth as they climbed higher. But with each mile, she could sense Axel becoming more alert, as if he could feel they were getting closer to something important. High above them, James had reached a ridgeline that gave him his first clear view of what lay ahead. What he saw made his blood run cold. In a valley that was supposed to be abandoned, a massive complex sprawled between the mountains. Modern buildings, security fences, helicopter pads, all carefully hidden from satellite view by advanced camouflage netting. Now he understood why they had tried so hard to break Axel, to find out exactly what he had seen. This wasn't just a secret facility. This was something that wasn't supposed to exist at all. And somewhere in his notebook, Mike had hidden the truth about what was happening here. A truth that had cost him his life and had nearly destroyed Axel. A truth that James was finally going to expose, no matter the cost. As the sun began to set, James found a sheltered position where he could observe the facility. The complex was larger than he'd initially thought, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter in regular patterns, and security cameras covered every approach. But what caught his attention were the kennels, row after row of them, partially hidden behind one of the main buildings. Even from this distance, he could see dogs being led between buildings by handlers in white coats. Military dogs, just like Axel. "Oh God, Mike," he whispered. "What did we stumble onto?" He pulled out the notebook again, studying Mike's coded message more carefully. The dots and dashes, they weren't random at all. They were coordinates too, but written in a way only someone with their specific training would recognize. Each set pointed to a different part of the facility. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen's Jeep was climbing the last switchback before her sister's cabin. Axel had grown increasingly agitated as they had driven higher into the mountains, his nose pressed against the window. She knew that behavior. Military dogs showed the same alertness when approaching known target locations. "You've been here before, haven't you?" she asked softly. "This is where it all started." The cabin came into view, a small wooden structure nestled among tall pines. But as she pulled up to the front, Axel suddenly began growling, a deep warning sound she had never heard from him before. Dr. Chen cut the engine, listening intently. At first, she heard nothing but mountain silence. Then, a twig snapping behind the cabin. Someone was there. She didn't hesitate. Throwing the Jeep into reverse, she hit the gas just as a figure emerged from behind the building, raising a weapon. Bullets pinged off the hood as she spun the vehicle around, racing back down the mountain road. "Hang on, boy!" she called to Axel as they took the curbs at dangerous speeds. In the rearview mirror, she saw 2 black SUVs pull out from hidden positions, following them. Back at the facility, James had noticed increased activity. Guards running to vehicles, radio chatter picking up. Something had spooked them. Had they spotted him? No, they were all focusing on the eastern road. Then he heard it, the distant sound of gunfire, followed by the screech of tires on mountain roads. Someone was coming, and the facility was responding with serious force. Making a split-second decision, James began moving along the ridge. Whatever was happening might be his best chance to get closer to the facility. The guards were distracted, their careful patrol patterns disrupted. On the mountain road below, Dr. Chen was fighting to keep the Jeep on the narrow track. The SUVs were gaining on them, more professional drivers on more powerful vehicles. A bullet shattered her side mirror. "They're not trying to kill us," she realized aloud. "They want us alive. They want you, don't they, Axel?" The dog barked in response, and suddenly she understood. They were close to something important, something Axel had seen before. That's why these people were so desperate to catch them. She took another curve too fast, feeling the Jeep's wheels lift on one side. They couldn't keep this up much longer. Sooner or later, they'd either crash or be forced off the road. That's when she saw it, a narrow fire road cutting up through the trees. It wasn't much more than a trail, probably too narrow for the SUVs. Without warning, she yanked the wheel, sending them bouncing onto the rough track. James heard the vehicles before he saw them, engine noise echoing off the mountains, getting closer. He found a position that gave him a view of both the facility and the winding road below. 2 black SUVs were chasing. Was that Sarah's old Jeep? His heart leaped as he caught a glimpse of movement in the back seat. Even at this distance, he'd know that shape anywhere. "Axel," he breathed. Somehow, they'd found their way here. But now they were in serious trouble. The Jeep had turned onto a narrow track, buying some time as the SUVs were forced to find another route. But James could see where the trail led, directly toward a box canyon. There was no way out up there. He had to do something. But what? He was hundreds of yards away with no weapon, no backup, and a facility full of armed guards between him and his friends. That's when he noticed something else. The kennels he'd seen earlier. The dogs were reacting to the commotion. Even from here, he could see them pacing, barking, pulling at their restraints. Military dogs, trained just like Axel, probably some of them the same ones that had been lost in suspicious circumstances. An idea formed in his mind, a crazy, desperate idea. Dr. Chen realized her mistake too late. The fire road ended at a sheer rock wall, hemming them in on 3 sides. Below, she could see the SUVs taking a longer route that would still cut off their escape. "I'm sorry," she said to Axel, reaching back to scratch his ears one last time. "I led us right into their trap." But Axel wasn't listening to her. His whole body was rigid, nose pointed toward the facility above them. A deep growl rumbled in his chest, not a sound of fear, but of recognition, of rage. James moved as quickly as he dared across the facility's perimeter. The guards were all focused on converging on the box canyon, leaving gaps in their coverage. He reached the kennel area unseen, his heart pounding. Up close, he could see that his guess had been right. These were military dogs, some of the best trained in the world. Dogs that had been stolen, their deaths faked, brought here for whatever twisted purpose this facility served, and every one of them recognized him, not as an individual, but as one of their own, a handler, someone who spoke their language. Their training held even after whatever had been done to them here. In the box canyon, Dr. Chen heard vehicles approaching. They were trapped. She turned to Axel, seeing the same fierce intelligence in his eyes that had made him such an exceptional military dog. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "it was worth it. You deserved a chance to be free." Axel barked once, sharp, clear, commanding. A sound that echoed off the canyon walls, and from somewhere above, another bark answered, then another, and another. The night erupted into chaos as James released the kennel locks. Dozens of highly trained military dogs burst from their cages, responding to Axel's call with a fury born of years of captivity. The sound of their barking filled the mountain air as they charged through the facility, overwhelming guards and handlers with military precision. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were elite warriors, trained for combat situations, each one worth a platoon of soldiers. And now they were free, directed by Axel's commanding bark toward the box canyon where Dr. Chen's jeep was trapped. James ran behind them, using the chaos as cover. Alarms blared across the facility as guards scrambled to respond to a situation they had never trained for. Through the confusion, he heard Morrison's voice on the radio. "Contain them! Don't let them reach the canyon." But it was too late. The dogs moved like a coordinated unit, taking down anyone who tried to stop them. Years of abuse had not broken their training or their spirit. It had only made them more determined. In the box canyon, Dr. Chen heard the approaching storm of barks and growls. Axel was standing in the back of the jeep now, his posture straight despite his injuries, barking commands to his approaching comrades. The SUVs had just reached the canyon entrance when the first wave of dogs hit them. Handlers and guards scattered as highly trained German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and other military breeds crashed into their lines like a tidal wave. "My God," Dr. Chen whispered as she watched the scene unfold. She had treated military dogs for years, but she had never seen anything like this. Dozens of them working together, coordinating their attacks, protecting each other like a true military unit. James reached the canyon just as Morrison and his remaining men arrived from the other direction. For a moment, everyone froze, creating a tableau of forces in the fading light. Morrison's team with their weapons, the freed dogs forming a protective circle around Dr. Chen's jeep, and James standing between them. "It's over, Morrison," James called out. "Let them go." "You don't understand what you've done," Morrison replied, his voice tight with tension. "Those dogs, what they've seen, it could start a war." "What did they see?" James demanded. "What were you doing to them in there?" Morrison's laugh was bitter. "You think this was about hurting dogs? We were trying to save lives. These dogs, they're better than any surveillance system ever created. They remember everything they see, every person, every location. They can't be hacked, can't be compromised. The perfect witnesses." "And what did they witness?" Dr. Chen asked, stepping out of the jeep. "What was so important that you had to fake their deaths and torture them for years?" "Ask your friend there." Morrison nodded toward Axel, who stood proudly despite his injuries. 3 years ago, he and Corporal Rodriguez saw something they weren't supposed to see. A meeting that never officially happened between people who were never officially there. People whose connection, if proven, would topple governments. James thought back to that day, remembering how Mike had reacted to whatever he had seen through those binoculars. "That's why you attacked us? To silence the witnesses?" "We tried to do it cleanly," Morrison said. "Rodriguez wasn't supposed to die, but he fought back, tried to protect the dog, and Axel. We thought we could recondition him, make him forget. But he never broke. None of them did." As if understanding they were talking about him, Axel moved forward, placing himself between Morrison's men and his freed companions. Other dogs moved with him, forming a line of furry defenders, their eyes gleaming with intelligence and determination. "Stand down," Morrison ordered his men, who were looking increasingly nervous as more dogs emerged from the shadows. "We can't win this fight." But one man didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he swung it toward Axel, his finger tightening on the trigger. "These dogs have to be put down. They know too much." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. James saw the man's intention and lunged forward, but he knew he wouldn't reach him in time. Dr. Chen cried out a warning. Morrison shouted, "No!" But it was another dog, one of the newly freed ones, that reached the gunman first. A Belgian Malinois launched itself through the air, knocking the man down before his shot could find its target. Other dogs surged forward, not to attack, but to protect their own. In the chaos that followed, James made it to Axel's side. His partner pressed against his leg, their old combat stance automatically resuming, as if they had never been separated. Together, they watched as Morrison's men backed away, weapons lowered, surrendering to the reality of their situation. "What happens now?" Dr. Chen asked, coming to stand beside them. James reached down to scratch Axel's ears, feeling the strong muscles still tense and ready beneath his hand. "Now, we find out what they were really doing here. Mike left us a map in his notebook, coordinates for different parts of the facility. Whatever they were hiding, we'll find it. You can't, Morrison said, but his voice had lost its authority. The evidence, the files, aren't in your computers? James smiled grimly. No, you wouldn't trust digital storage for something this sensitive. But I bet there are paper records somewhere in there. And I've got about 30 highly trained military dogs who are very good at finding hidden things. As if to emphasize his point, Axel barked once, a sharp, commanding sound. The other dogs responded immediately, forming into search patterns just as they had been trained to do. Years of military training was overriding their fear and anger, transforming them back into the elite units they had once been. Morrison watched them move out, his face a mask of resignation. You have no idea what you're about to unleash. Maybe not, James replied, checking the coordinates in Mike's notebook. But my friend died trying to expose this. Axel suffered for years protecting the truth. Whatever we find in there, the world needs to know. He looked down at his partner, seeing the same determination in Axel's eyes that he felt in his own heart. Ready to finish this mission, buddy? Axel's tail wagged once, and together they moved toward the facility, leading their army of four-legged warriors toward the truth that had cost them so much to protect. The search through the facility took hours. While Morrison and his men were secured under the watchful eyes of several military dogs, James, Dr. Chen, and Axel methodically checked every building, every room, following the coordinates in Mike's notebook. The truth, when they finally found it, was hidden in the most secure part of the complex, a reinforced underground room filled with filing cabinets and surveillance equipment. But it wasn't the technology that made James's breath catch. It was the wall of photographs. Hundreds of images showed secret meetings between people who should never have been in the same room together. Terrorist leaders with government officials, arms dealers with corporate executives, evidence of conspiracies that spanned continents. The dogs saw all of this, Dr. Chen whispered, looking at the photographs. James nodded slowly. They were the perfect surveillance system. Like Morrison said, they couldn't be hacked, couldn't be compromised. They just watched and remembered. And when someone needed proof of these meetings, they would bring in the dogs to identify the participants, Dr. Chen finished, to confirm that certain people had been in certain places at certain times. Axel moved purposefully through the room, his nose leading him to a specific filing cabinet. He scratched at the bottom drawer, whining softly. James knelt beside him, feeling his heart race as he opened it. Inside was a single folder marked with a date, the day of the ambush, the day Mike died. The photographs inside showed what Axel and Mike had witnessed that day. A meeting between three men whose connection would indeed topple governments, a prominent senator, a known terrorist financier, and a high-ranking military official, all in a location that was supposed to be an abandoned hunting cabin. Mike must have photographed it, James said softly. That's why they killed him. But they needed Axel alive, to verify the identities, to make sure they found all the evidence. Axel pressed against his leg, and James realized something. You weren't just protecting the information, were you, boy? You were protecting all of them, too. He gestured to the other dogs, now gathering in the room. You knew if you broke, they'd have no reason to keep the others alive. A soft whine was his only answer, but the intelligence in Axel's eyes said everything. For 3 years, he had endured torture and abuse, staying strong not just to protect the truth, but to protect his fellow warriors. We need to get this to the authorities, Dr. Chen said, but James shook his head. Not the authorities, the press, every major newspaper, every TV station. Too many people in power are compromised. He looked at Morrison, who stood defeated in the doorway. That's what Mike was trying to do, wasn't it? Go public with everything? Morrison nodded slowly. Why do you think we worked so hard to stop him? Once this gets out, the whole system comes down. Maybe it needs to come down, James replied, gathering the files. Maybe that's what Mike died for, what Axel suffered for. The sun was rising by the time they emerged from the facility. Dr. Chen had called in every favor she had, arranging transport for all the freed dogs to safe locations. Legitimate military and police K-9 units where they would be protected and valued. One by one, the dogs were loaded into vehicles, each one stopping to touch noses with Axel before leaving. It was like watching soldiers saying goodbye to their commanding officer, acknowledging the one who had kept them alive through their darkest hours. The evidence was distributed to multiple journalists, ensuring no single person could be silenced or bought off. Within days, the story would break worldwide, sending shockwaves through governments and corporations across the globe. Morrison and his men were taken into custody, their own testimony adding weight to the evidence. The truth about the military dog's disappearances, about Mike's death, about everything that had happened in that mountain facility would finally come to light. Standing in Dr. Chen's clinic a week later, James watched as she removed Axel's final bandages. His partner's wounds had healed well, and his eyes were bright with life and purpose again. "He's ready to go home," Dr. Chen said softly. "Though after everything that's happened, I'm not sure where home is anymore." James knelt beside Axel, looking into the eyes that had never lost their loyalty, their courage, their unwavering spirit. "Home isn't a place, Sarah. It's where your family is. And this guy, he's the only family I need." Axel's tail wagged, and he pressed his forehead against James's chest, the same gesture of trust and affection he had always used during their military days. Despite everything he had endured, his heart remained unchanged. "What will you do now?" Dr. Chen asked as she watched them together. James smiled, scratching behind Axel's ears. "There are other stories out there waiting to be told, other wrongs that need to be made right, and I've got the best partner in the world to help me find them." As if understanding, Axel barked once, clear, strong, and ready for whatever mission lay ahead. They walked out of the clinic together, partner and partner, soldier and soldier, each step in perfect sync. The morning sun was bright, the air was crisp with promise, and the road ahead was open. The truth they had uncovered would change the world. But for James, the biggest change had already happened. He had found his purpose again, his reason to live, and it had come in the form of a loyal German shepherd who had never stopped believing in him. Axel looked up at him, tail wagging, eyes bright with trust and love. No words were needed between them. They were together again, and that was all that mattered. The world would never know the full extent of Axel's courage, of how one dog's unwavering loyalty had protected not just secrets, but the lives of his fellow warriors. But James knew, and he would make sure that every day of Axel's life from now on was filled with the love and respect he deserved. They got into James's truck, Axel taking his place in the passenger seat like he had never left. As they drove away, leaving the clinic and the memories of darkness behind, James reached over to scratch his partner's ears. "Good boy," he whispered. "Let's go home." And Axel, the bravest soldier James had ever known, wagged his tail and looked ahead to their next adventure together.